Thank you for staying with us. If there is one area where the Buhari administration gets a pat on the back, it is that of infrastructure development, from road construction and rehabilitation to rail and even housing, all under the watchful eye of the Minister of Works and Housing, Babatunde Fashola. Nigerians have given the administration a pass mark for undertaking meaningful infrastructural projects. Some Nigerians see projects like the second Niger Bridge, expansion and rehabilitation of the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway will be part of President Buhari's legacy. Well, joining us via Zoom from Abuja is the Minister of Works and Housing, Babatunde Fashola San. Good morning. Thank you for joining us on TVC Breakfast.
Good morning.
Now, let's begin this way. After 3 years of holding the Ministry of Works and Housing, give us a sense of the journey so far. A ministry overseeing a ministry that has two areas in focus.
Well, in the last 3 years, the way to summarize things is simply to say that we are serving every state in Nigeria as far as mandate for roads and bridges are concerned. And we are serving every state in Nigeria as far as our mandate for housing is also concerned. There is still a lot of work to do, but the investments are yielding results. We have over 13,000 kilometers of roads and bridges under construction or rehabilitation, as the case may be. We are constructing houses and allocating them in 35 states and the FCT under the National Housing Program alone. There are interventions in housing by the Federal Housing Authority in different parts of the country, which is one of our parastatals. The Federal Mortgage Bank, another of the parastatals under the ministry's supervision, is intervening in financing housing using mortgages and also financing houses, granting estate development loans. As I speak, the Federal Mortgage Bank has about 7,000 plus housing units at different stages of readiness and completion across the globe. If you drill down into housing, it is not just building and mortgages. We're also granting consents and transactions to land. In fact, that's what I was doing this morning before I joined the program, approving people's application for consent. And then we are digitizing the land registry. The project will go live this year. That means that we are moving from paper documents to a digital land registry. That will further improve efficiency there. We've scanned 50,000 files, and we're at about 90% of scanning documents. And very soon, it will be a more efficient land tenure system to drill down the housing supply value chain. But in summarizing this, let me say that, yes, people say the Buhari administration, as you say, has acquitted itself well. But the point is that infrastructure is not an isolated commitment. It is a commitment in aid of the economy, in aid of business efficiency, in aid of reduced travel time, in aid of cost saving and time saving and economic growth. And I think that is an important point to make.
Can you tell us the role of finance in all of these projects? Quite gigantic. How well has the financing gone? What are the limitations?
Interesting that you raised this point, because the front row seats, if you like that expression, that infrastructure has gained in the policy commitment of governments across the world Every time a new president is inaugurated, a new governor, a new prime minister, a new local government chairman, a new mayor, even legislators, everybody commits to some form of investment in infrastructure as an economic driver. The reason for that is that after the Second World War, there was a program called the Marshall Plan. It was a financing plan by the government of the US to rebuild Europe, especially the city of London. And it was after that investment that they saw rapid economic growth, employment, quality of life change, and scientists and economists all over the world began to track and monitor the impact of infrastructure in driving jobs, in driving economic growth, in creating prosperity. So money plays an important role. And this is why, in spite of dwindling oil revenues at the onset of this government, in spite of challenges with getting a budget in place that we all remember, this president was single-minded in his commitment that wherever he found the money, he will use. So one of the monies that was committed to infrastructure was monies recovered from outside Nigeria, stolen and looted out of Nigeria into foreign lands. And they had been seized. And those governments were going to, they had actually seized them. They were not going to. And it was this president's goodwill to say, please, can we have this money back? And they released some of those monies to us on condition. So some of those monies were committed to the Niger Bridge, committed to Lagos Ibadan, committed to Abuja Kanu Expressway, and the results are there to see. Another source of funding was debt issuance, and one of them was the Sukuk funding, which committed to certain milestones of project implementation as a basis for granting funding. So for those who complain about debt, that is one place where the government has raised money, and all over the country you will see the Sukuk signboard so that you can see what the debt is for. The other place is the NNPC tax credit, which is one of the broader policy of asking private sector to say, look, let us have a partnership, pay your taxes in advance, but don't give them to us. Use them to finance infrastructure that the public can use, which may benefit your business. So the Dangote Group has been involved in that. The NLNG, Nigerian Liquefied National Gas Company, which is partly government-owned and majority shareholding is private, have invested their own in building a bridge in Rivers, a very, very big and defining infrastructure that will connect the mainland of Bodo to the island of Boni for the first time in the history of Nigeria. Otherwise, the only way to get to that island has always been by boat or by helicopter. And in bad weather, nobody moves. This is the first time, and it's almost finishing. So that was a 199 billion naira project. So sometimes when I hear, oh, nothing is being done by the federal government in Rivers, go and see the Bodo Boni Bridge, apart from the Enugu Port Harcourt Road and so many others. But that's another matter. So that is another form of funding. It is in that basket that the NNPC tax credit comes into play to advance the scope of the space of work by providing funding around, if I recall, 21 major routes covering over 1,000 kilometers that are critical petroleum pipeline and transport network for distributing goods and service in the country. Now, the interesting thing about this NNPC funding, it comes largely from the MPDC. MPDC is a subsidiary of the NNPC. And if you go back in time, this was the MPDC that was immersed in scandal, where its money was being used for party patronage. The Buhari government is using it for national development across over 1,000 kilometers of road.
Right, and in addition to all you said, the other leg of Sam's question was, the challenges. Why are we still having lingering challenges fueling the infrastructure deficits that we still have to endure in the country. Of course, on the other hand is the issue of even the budget, even about 35% or so that the infrastructure ranks in the country's GDP. Help us to understand why this sector is still being bedeviled with these concerns.
Financial limitations.
I think the best way I can explain that is for us to situate our minds back. When last did we have such absolute, resolute, and unswerving commitment to investing in infrastructure? You will go back perhaps to a little after the Civil War, during the Reconstruction Program. That was when more roads were being built, more bridges were being built. Nigeria was being opened up on an unprecedented scale, ports, airports, and all of that. But shortly after that period, we got enmeshed as a people in a political squabble that lasted from, I think, 1976, a brief interregnum between 79 and 84, and again back to struggle with the military to get out of our lives. During that period, Nigeria's population was growing, but the commensurate investment in infrastructure was not being made. And so there's a big hurdle, a big gap to fill. So you have so many more people using the same network of roads. The number of cars has exploded, not even quadrupled. The rail has essentially been dormant until this administration started the revival of the rail. So we still truck petroleum products, agro products, industrial products on the road. That should stop over time as we return to sufficiency of infrastructure. We still have problems in the airport. Those airports were built over 40 years ago to move just a few 100,000 people per annum. How many airlines were flying into Nigeria? So we are trying to fill a gap. So it's a race against necessity, really. So that is my explanation. So, for example, the second Niger bridge that people talk about is about 30 years behind the time it was conceived. The Bodo Boni bridge and road that I spoke about was first inaugurated for construction in 1979. 3 contracts were awarded. They all failed. They never got off ground. If you go to the site, you will see the abandoned contracts there. So these things are 20 years, in some cases, behind their time.
Now, laudable effort being made by the government, one would say, but there are concerns with regards to insecurity. Now, when you look at the Kaduna-Abuja rail, you see what has happened, and that is concerning for a lot of Nigerians who cannot take advantage of what government is doing, enjoy, the dividends of democracy with regards to that.
Okay, as you rightly said at the beginning, I have responsibility for the Ministry of Works and Housing, and ordinarily I will not venture outside my area of responsibility. I also don't have responsibility, for example, for the rail program. It is the responsibility of the Ministry of Transportation. But it is impossible not to acknowledge that there are security challenges that impact either the pace at which some services can be delivered, or in fact impede the optimization of the benefit of some services. And so that is an area where there is still work to be done by our government, and it is an area that I tell people that continues to morph and remains very dynamic. The security challenges of 2015, for example, have changed. We have overcome those, and new ones have developed. And the point I also make to people is that kidnapping and all of the challenges that have now reared their heads again are not novel to the Buhari administration. One of the reasons why many people moved away from the Niger Delta at one time, long before the Buhari administration, was the hostage taking and kidnapping of expatriates in that area. So that area has eased off that, and it has manifested itself in another part of the country or in other parts of the country. Again, I am aware that there's a lot of effort being made by those responsible to bring them under control and to make them something that become history.
Right. We need to quickly go on a commercial break. When we return, we'll continue this conversation with you. Do stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. We've been having a conversation before we went on the break with the Minister of Works and Housing, Babatunde Fashola. I was just giving us an update on how far the government has come with regards to issues bordering on his ministry. And before we went on the break, he was speaking on insecurity and its challenge on some of this development that government has made. And I think Sam wanted to ask a question too.
Yes. I want to know, you're talking about financial responsibility, especially with some of the projects that have been abandoned for a long time, contracts awarded 2-3 times. And is there going to be a reckoning eventually about what happened to that money? And also reckoning with all those who have tax credits. Is there a supervision of the monies they are spending on the projects to see if they are actually faithful to their pledges?
Okay, let me deal with the first one, contracts that were not performed. You see, what I tell people is that human activity never evaporates, and it never disappears. The footfalls and the prints are always there for any diligent investigation. But I am sure that if we told Nigerians that we were busy investigating the failed Bodo Boni contracts, that's why we haven't built it. That is not what they want to hear. It is service first that they want to see. And you will see some of that commentary when this government started in 2015, trying to recover some funds that had been diverted from the public till for electoral purposes. And the list was as long as anybody's arm. And after a while, the sensibility that you are getting, but I think that those things don't disappear. Now, the other part of your question about the NMPC, the tax credits generally, the comfort that I believe you should have is that because those monies that they use are the taxes that they ought to pay, all we are asking them to do is pay them in advance. So essentially, it is government revenue. So those roads are Nigerian roads. And the process that leads them to the award of a contract, for example, is the same process that we use when we are funding the program from budget. We go through the Bureau of Public Procurement, which is the government's statutory price advisor. So you cannot use a tax credit unless the BPP says, I am satisfied with this price, if you understand what I mean. So it's the same process that we go through, that they go through. And then the tax verification is such that there's a bandwidth of how much you can spend as tax, so that all your tax liabilities don't then go to a road. You must still pay some for each year into government revenue. And that is being done through a checks and balance system. We certify that work of X value has been done. Payment is then also counter-approved by the Ministry of Finance, verified and finally authenticated with a tax certificate by FIRS. So there's a governance process around it. You can't just get up and say, I'm going to build the road, then I've spent X naira, come and give me back. No, that's not how it happens.
Yeah, but let's also look at what's your assessment on the, will I say the growth or the increase of Chinese-funded infrastructure projects in the country. One of them is the Lagos-Ibadan project which is ongoing. How would you weigh the impact as against the options from the West regarding meeting Nigeria's financing needs? And on the other hand, there is also the concern of, Nigeria not getting the shorter end of the stick by utilizing this foreign funding options.
So first of all, I would like to have a more detailed conversation based on verifiable facts about this hype about Chinese funding and Chinese this and Chinese that. I would like to have a more detailed and rigorous conversation about it. Let me also press the button for you to remind you that in my ministry, there are currently only 2 Chinese-funded contracts. Only two. And let me say for the record that contrary to your opening statement, there is no Chinese funding on the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, not 1 kobo. Let me repeat that there is no 1 kobo on the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway from China funds or anything of the like. So let me be clear about those things. But the 2 Chinese-funded projects that I have in my ministry are the Akwanga, Kefi, Lafia, Makurdi Highway and the Makurdi 9th Mile Enugu Highway. These contracts had been signed by the previous administration before Buhari was elected. So let me repeat that. These contracts that are China loans have been signed before the Buhari government came into office. But there were still conditionalities like the award of the actual contract, because there are usually 2 contracts, the financing contract and the construction contract. And that's why I say I would like to have a more detailed conversation, because I think a lot of fear is being built. Most of China's funds come from its Export-Import Bank. EXIM is the acronym for it. Nigeria also has an EXIM bank. And I'm sure that later in the life of Nigeria, because I'm sure Nigeria will become a very rich nation. Currently, its Export-Import Bank is being used for agri only. In the fullness of time, Nigeria will be a country that will then be of some concern. Oh, Nigeria is lending money to this, financing this. But America has an EXIM bank. So many big countries, big economies have export-import. They use it to grow international trade. So there is really nothing to lose anybody's head about, in my own view. I have heard the concerns about, oh, you are borrowing too much. There's always a concern about borrowing. The question is, what are you borrowing against? What is your plan to pay? What is the alternative to borrowing? Is it to increase taxation? And I've said to people, if you don't want borrowing, let us have a debate. What's the alternative? Where is the money coming from? Or should we stop the projects? In which case, our conditions and our pay will continue. Well, those are conversations for another time. I have seen some of those agreements, and in my own view, and this is me wearing my cap as a legal practitioner, I've seen those things. They are not onerous conditions. The terms for repayment and the tenure of the loan give you a longer time to pay. They are not priced as commercial loans. And then the Chinese EXIM model requires that you, the borrowing party, must also commit your money. So it's not just take money. Commit is like a counterpart funding to ensure that the service and the infrastructure is being delivered. And these are important things that we must bear in mind.
Right. Let's get some specifics with some roads now, especially the east-west road that the president has said is dear to him. How far have we come with that particular road?
Okay, let me say again that sometime in the life of the previous administration, in the wisdom of the former president, the east-west road was taken away from the Ministry of Works and transferred to the then newly created Ministry of Niger Delta Affairs. So in the last 7 years, the Ministry of Works under me had nothing to do with the east-west road, nothing. It was this year that I got a letter from the president authorizing my ministry to take over the East-West Road this year. I can't quite remember the month now. And in that process, we must do due diligence. First is to do a proper transfer. So the Minister for the Niger Delta Affairs, my colleague Godswill Akpabio, then communicated to me. There was a formal public ceremony of a handing over, but it doesn't end there. If you say that you have transferred the road to us in condition A verification process of those conditions must now take place on site. So we have finished that process. We are satisfied with what they say they have done and where they say they handed over to us, because there are financial consequences for that. And the next level is to transfer equipment, staff who were working on that road where necessary, to transfer files, to also transfer vehicles and all of the project machinery. That has also been completed. Now that that is completed, we need to do some revision of pricing, because the East-West Road has been under construction for well over a decade or more. So prices have moved, conditions have changed. The Eleme Port Harcourt junction is the real point of pain. So we are now waiting for the Bureau of Public Procurement to approve the proposed price changes and all of that, because a lot of relocation has to be done at that junction, the very, very critical economic junction for the people of the Niger Delta and for Nigeria in terms of the supply network to the port, Eleme, and all of that. So that is where we are now. If we get those approvals, then we go back to the Federal Executive Council to get authorization to expend how much has been certified by BPP. Then the next hurdle is, where is the money coming from? But there are positive news fillers that I get around there. So this is what it takes to build a road. The governance process has to be done. And you remember Sam himself said, look, how are we sure that the tax credit money is being properly spent? This is what we must go through in order to then do our work.
Well, infrastructure is a very important political high point. Going towards 2023, how well do you want to position infrastructure for your party going forward?
Okay, what I do every year with regards to infrastructure is to go back to the people from time to time and say, how is it this year? How long, for example, is your journey time when you travel this year? And the report I have got year on year is that, oh, our journey time is better this year than last year, because it's not a light bulb switch. It's a very, very well coordinated, progressive journey. Building roads, for example, kilometer after kilometer until you finish, say, like a Lagos-Ibadan, 127 kilometers of dual carriageway. That's not something you do overnight. Or the Abuja to Kano, 375 kilometers of dual carriageway. But as you progress, you begin to feel. And so we have enough feedback, not what we say, what the people who use the road are saying. That, oh, I used to spend 3 hours on this road. I now spend 1 hour. That's the economic impact. Because first of all, cost of travel is reduced. Time spent in travel is reduced. That savings in time can be turned to other productive activities. And that is why I opened my intervention here, that you cannot isolate a conversation of infrastructure from the economy. President Buhari didn't campaign on infrastructure. He campaigned on the economy. So this is a driver of the economy. In all places where we have built roads, for example, what the surveys show us is that the land values across the adjoining areas have increased by up to 30 or 40%. Those lands don't belong to federal government. They are individual, communal, corporate lands. So those are value asset improvement, capitalization of assets, if you like. So they are richer because they can raise more money with the increased value of their land. And you can experiment with this in a neighborhood where there's no road to your house. And when a road is built, your landlord is going to increase rent. That rent goes to his pocket. That's part of wealth creation. So, and you can also drill down the supply chain. On one project, I think it was the section of the Lagos Ibadan, when I asked the contractor to tell me how many suppliers he was using, because all the diesel, granite, sharp sand, crushed stone, cement, reinforcement, water supply, lubricants are supplied by people, not the contractor. He was using 145 different suppliers. So those are all the small business owned by people, maybe some oil, some lubricants, some granite, and all of those things. And this is how infrastructure begins to touch the lives, the lives of people. So it's a very, very extensive intervention that connects people, some of who I will never meet, but who benefited from it.
Right. We need to quickly go on another break. When we return, we'll continue this conversation with you. Stay with us, please. Thank you for staying with us. We've been speaking with the Minister of Works and Housing, Babatunde Fashola. And before we went on the break, he was bringing us the political side to housing, perhaps. And Kemi had some questions she wanted to ask him.
Right, because just as infrastructure is crucial for many Nigerians, housing is as well. And even though you have, challenged the United Nations housing deficit figures, which is going to about 28 million Nigerians said to be at par or set to be affected by the housing deficit in the country, there is, really yawning need for the government of the day to also speak to these issues and, tell Nigerians what is being offered, even as we build up to the next general election. What's your response, Honorable Minister?
Well, I won't be drawn into any further conversation about verifiable data. What I do know is that we need to plan and deliver services on the basis of verifiable data. So if somebody tells me in my own home that I have to feed 200 people every day, I have to ask the person, where are the people? How did you get the number? Because I know how many people live in my house. And that is the basis of planning. But be that as it may, I have alluded to some of the things we are doing in terms of the National Housing Project. We are now in what we call a season of completion and commissioning. So those projects are being completed, commissioned by the ministers from the states representing the president. So we've done Gombe, we've done Imo, we've done Ogun, I believe, we've done Osun, we've done Kano, we've done Kaduna, we've done Nasarawa, and a couple of other states. Some of the beneficiaries of those projects now are people you and I know very well, members of the 1994 Super Eagles, who had waited for almost 3 decades before the promise of housing made to them when they won laurels for Nigeria have finally been fulfilled by the Buhari administration. We have opened a portal, the National Housing Portal, which you can check on our ministry's website for those who still want to buy. There are still houses for sale in 35 states, and you can see the price and the cost, the price and the type, sorry. But let us all be reminded as we discuss housing that land, which is a major component in housing provision, is a state matter, not a federal matter. So states have a bigger responsibility, if you ask me, to roll out housing supply, because the people who need the houses are not federal people. They are residents, indigenes, and communities within state boundaries. And I am able to say that I know that across party lines, many states are also rolling out housing projects. But the other point to also make is that I insist that we must have a conversation about housing, not just on ownership, but also to address those people who live in rented accommodation and how their rent is paid. And I believe that the day we can bring the scheduling of rent payment closer to the time when incomes come in, which is at the end of each month, rather than 2 years in advance, we would have turned a major economic curve in Nigeria, because I believe it has an inflationary index to price through a passing on of cost. If I have to go and look for money that I have not earned in 2 years in advance, and I give it to you as my landlord, I'm going to recover that money somewhere. So you may have to come back and pay more for a particular service after collecting that money. And we all pass that cost around. And people are really vulnerable at that. Again, that is not a federal matter, but it is something that really just touches my being. And I wish I could do more about it, because rent control is a state responsibility. So there's so much going on in terms of housing supply, housing delivery, and the private sector, which is the biggest driver and supplier, is also pulling its weight. I can say that under this administration, because not only are some of them being supported through estate development loans by the Federal Mortgage Bank, the Shelter Afrique, which is a Pan-African organization of which Nigeria is a major shareholder, is also now seeing Nigeria as an investment destination for housing finance. And private sector operators are usually the beneficiaries of Shelter Afrique loans, not government directly. So there's a lot going on that we need to be acquainted with.
Right. Let's look at other matters now. It's been reported that you said you would retire from active politics in 2023. And we want to know if that's true and why. Because there were those who that you would retire from active politics in 2023. And we want to know if that is true and why you want to retire, because there were those who were looking forward to seeing you someday perhaps throw your hat into the ring of seeking to be president of this country.
Okay, so there are two things there. I told those who were looking for my hat that I don't wear a hat, I wear a cap. And since they were throwing hats, I didn't have a hat to throw. And one said he was going to make a hat for me. And I said, okay, if you want to make a hat for me, I like etu. So make etu, but he didn't bring the etu hat. So and by the time all the hats were in the ring, there was no hat to throw. So, you know, next year will be 21 straight years that I've been a public servant. I have another address. I started out my career as a private legal practitioner. And I think that there's some time when you leave the public space. And we're talking about younger people. I came into public service at 39. Next year I will be 60. And I think it's time to yield the space for much younger and more ebullient people. That doesn't mean I'm leaving politics, but it is my strong desire to get out of the public service space. And I can play a lot of roles without holding a title. And I've made that very clear. I intend to continue to serve Nigeria, but I think I can do that without holding a title. I don't need a title to serve my country.
Well, 2023 is on. Right. We have 3 candidates that are, in the sense, they have thrown their hats on the ring.
They have hats.
Yes, they all have hats and caps and everything. Who says only hats can be thrown? You can throw caps, you can throw anything. Now,
well, Sam, you're now trying to spin the cap. All we know is hats. Yes. So for those who don't wear hats,
yeah, they don't wear hats. They can even throw themselves in the ring. You know, so your candidate, as you have said before, is Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu.
Without a doubt.
Why do you think he is the one this time?
Sam, you know that it is on the 28th that electioneering campaign will start.
This is not a campaign. This is...
No. Just you've asked me a question, so let me answer you. So, you see, a society that is rooted in law and order, where people play by the rules, is the society I like to live in. Those are the rules. 28 is how many days to go? 8 days to go. Bring me back. Then I will come and tell you all the reasons and more why Bola Tinubu is the man that I will endorse and trust to do this job.
And we will.
8 days.
Right.
8 days. Don't worry, sir.
I will take you on that.
And we will indeed be reaching out to you, Leonard Silk. But still talking about, well, topical issues. All right, the campaigns are days away. But then there are topical issues which you have also lent your voice to, especially the ASUU strike. And we saw how the students across the country, how they were on the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway to air their grievances on the matter, and they have not relented. What are your thoughts on the lingering problem? Because some said you only addressed the fact that students were hitting the streets to protest, but what are your thoughts on the unresolved issues?
You see, it's unfortunate that we have this strike. But again, I am not going to get ahead of myself because I don't have all of the facts around the strike. I know that there are issues of a prior commitment made to them in the previous administration. I know there are issues of how they should be paid, which digital platform, whether it is IPs or not IPs. I know there are issues of autonomy, a lot of things. So I never got involved, and I try not to get involved in things where I don't have the facts upon which to make a judgment. So it was an oblique reference I made when I was explaining to commuters who were inconvenienced as a result of construction work on the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, which many channels, TV channels, including, I believe, yours, highlighted. And while I was explaining the cause of the gridlock, I then also said that I heard that students were planning to go and block the road in protest. And I said that their right to protest was legitimate. And I repeat that. But that right does not include a right to block the road. And I also repeat that because it is an offense under the Federal Highways Act. And I stand by what I say. I've been surprised that some people who claim to be public informants saying that, oh, Fashola said protest is illegal. I would never say such a thing. I was a governor. I managed protests. I was a student too. I protested. But blocking the road and protesting are two different things. And in no society, any civilized society in the world, will you have the right to go and block a road because you are protesting. Of course, you can achieve the same thing, which is to slow down traffic and live on the margins and the spirit of the law by protesting alongside the road. I'm sure every motorist will want to see you anyway, and that will slow down traffic, and your point is made. But to really go and barricade the road, I mean, excuse me, who does that in which society? And those kind of things, we must enlighten ourselves about these things. And yeah, I like to live in a lawful society. I hope that the crisis arising from the ASUU strike ends soon. And for me, it is bad enough to have a crisis, but what will be most painful is to waste a crisis. So this crisis must not be wasted. And that, for me, is the positive side I look. How do we find an enduring solution? Because this is not the first time ASUU has gone on strike. And all of us as Nigerians must look for different default buttons to hit when we are in discomfort. I agree that there may be cause for protest, but hey, shutting down everybody and the whole system, does it solve the problem? Those are things that those who know better about labor and union matters should address.
Right. Let's talk about the 2023 elections. And
Again?
yes, yes.
Not campaign.
Not campaign now. Not campaign. Now,
Okay.
it's about our democracy, because one thing that gives room for a thriving democracy is a vibrant opposition. And you are quoted as saying recently that what we see is not a vibrant opposition, so to speak. And I'm wondering what you think gave room or rise to that.
Well, I think again, you see, it's a very fine line. You know, people forget that opposition is also part of government. People forget that. Government is not just the majority. Government governs with the majority. But oftentimes they're not. Okay, when we pass the national budget, for example, have you ever heard that opposition says they don't approve the budget? They don't say so. But what critical pathway, what critical differences, what critical inputs do they say, no, this ₦1 is better spent here than there? When did you hear that? So when did the opposition say, okay, majority has brought its budget, the same ₦10 that the majority wants to spend on this is where we think it should be spent? Did you hear that? Have you ever heard that? That's the kind of opposition I would like to play. When a policy comes, so that is the kind of opposition that keeps the majority even on his toes, that he can go into a public debate and have eggs on his faces. So these are for me, and even if and this is not limited to those in parliament. When as the opposition party, okay, let's go back. Everybody remembers what Buhari promised: security, economic, corruption. Ask the Nigerian people what the opposition party that they can remember has promised them in 16 years. How many of the promises they made can they remember? So the APC, and again, I don't even want to go there. I don't want to start a campaign. So let me stop. Let me just stop, please.
Well, I'm sure that looking ahead to May, you have a sense of where you want all the projects to be at. For instance, I'm looking at the second Niger Bridge and its iconic potential for the Nigerian, infrastructure story and so on. Where have you really pegged every activity you have as a structured person by the time you are bowing out?
Oh, if the objective was May next year, I am sure that the second Niger Bridge will be in use by then. You see, but my target and the commitment we made is to see if we can open it to traffic before the end of this year. And we still think that is feasible. And the reason I say that is this: the bridge has two main components. The one component is the bridge itself from the Asaba end of the river to the Onitsha end of the river. That's finished. So you can drive on it now. That's finished. The other components are the connecting roads from the Onitsha end to the bridge head and from the Asaba end to the bridge head. Now, the one that is still giving us a little problem is the Asaba end, because we are still trying to resolve compensation issues, community issues, but we have to sand fill. So dredgers are there right now as I speak. The rain has delayed us a little bit, but in a matter of days, hopefully we should start. And then once we establish the land on which to build the road, it's just about a 3 or 4 kilometer connection that allows you from the Asaba end to join the bridge if you don't want to use the old bridge for now. So, and the land has to settle before you can build on it, but there's a technology to accelerate that. And I still think that that is feasible between now and December, which gives us roughly about almost 100 days plus or minus. So that's where we are. But as for May, certainly we would have would have been done and dusted with it. But let me just say in relation to that, that we are now in what I call a season of completion and commissioning. And you will see what we have been doing in the last few months. As I said, commissioning housing projects. We have also been handing over road projects. F1 like Erimo Iwaraja Road in Osun was recently completed and handed over. Isoko Ring Road in Delta State was completed and handed over. Sections of the Adeja Unguru Road in between Jigawa and Yobe State were completed and handed over. Sections of the Numan Yola Road, the Gombe to Katungu were also recently handed over, and so on and so forth. So,
All right.
and this has been the process since December last year. So we're winding down really, and
All right.
we will finish as many things as we can before we go and hand the rest to the next team.
Let's quickly spare the remaining 1 minute we have left for this interview to talk about how you, or what innovations you brought on board in these federal ministries you headed in sanitizing the open bidding process of this contract. You spoke earlier about, corruption, and you as a partner of the Buhari administration. How do things stand now?
Well, the reforms that are still that I'm still agitating for because of the way that the public procurement law currently stands. It does not help to grow local capacity. Those who are largely benefiting are the well-established companies, and I hope that reform will happen sooner rather than later to open up the space for smaller businesses, especially Nigerian-owned businesses, to be able to benefit. This law was made, I think, Public Procurement Act 2007. I think it's time to review that law to give effect to the local content policy led by the president in his executive order 7. So you have a conflict between current policy and old law. And again, you need bipartisan agreement to change the law.
Right. Minister of Works and Housing, Babatunde Fashola San, thank you so much for your time on the program.